So what exactly can you look forward to when it comes to this COP? In the last episode, we covered what the UAE, the host nation, intends to achieve when it comes to COP. But then what can the world look forward to? What are some of those obvious things that are going to be addressed when it comes to COP? The first one is the loss and damage fund. This is definitely top of mind for everyone who is going to COP and everyone who follows these proceedings. And the reason why the loss and damage fund is a big deal is that it was a landmark agreement in the last COP that was held in Egypt. Now, a little bit of a history around the loss and damage fund. The background is that the whole concept of climate change is largely because of, yes, human activities, but for the most part, when you zero in on exactly what that means, it boils down to fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are extractives, oil, gas, coal, that have been used, of course, by developed countries to be able to advance. And for the most part, the developed countries, on the one hand, have industrialized and they've continued to emit carbon into the atmosphere, which has resulted to a change in the climate over a period of time. Developing countries, the global south, are the ones that are bearing the brunt of the effects of the fossil fuels that have been emitted, or the carbon that has been emitted by the developed countries. And so there's been this push over years. It's been a 30-year push to make sure, or to try and get a fund that is globally set up to be able to address the challenges of the developing countries that are the most affected. You know, like the island states where when there's a flood or there's a cyclone, you know, a lot of their infrastructure is washed away and they literally have to start from scratch. And the argument has also been that they do this, on the one hand, they have to address the issue of climate, but on the other hand, they still have to be able to develop. These are the countries that still have to build schools, rebuild roads, rebuild hospitals whenever those kind of incidences happen. And so there's been a push to get the developed countries that are considered rich and wealthy, having become wealthy on the backbone of fossil fuels, that is the main reason for carbon emissions. And so there's been a push to have a fund set up. Now, the fund was agreed on. There was no structure, but it was simply agreed on in the last day or second last day of COP27 last year. And then that was celebrated as a major milestone, but that was just an announcement. And what happened after that was that member states or different negotiators were tasked with having to come up with a framework of making sure that there's an understanding. A fund is just a fund. But then who's going to pay for that fund? Because there has to be deposits that are put into the fund. How is it going to be capitalized? Who's going to disburse it? Who's going to manage it? There's been all these kind of questions when it comes to loss and damage fund. And so far in the year, there have been 5 major meetings to specifically discuss the issue of the loss and damage fund. And over time, during those meetings, there's been a lot of contention, especially because the developed countries have had a challenge around paying, which has always been the issue. Like, how much do they pay? Who pays? Why do they need to pay? They say they understand the need to pay, but then there's always this reticence when it comes to actualizing it. Earlier this month, in the month of November, there was finally an agreement in the 5th meeting of negotiators. There was an agreement around a structured way of how the fund would then be put in place. There was still no concrete agreement around who's going to pay and how they're going to pay. And there'll be an announcement in terms of the progress that has been made at COP28 in Dubai. And so that's one of the things that people are looking forward to, because developing countries went away from COP27 excited that finally they had a solution. But do we actually have a solution? We'll wait and find out in COP28. The second thing that anyone who's following the global conversations around COP28 should look forward to is the global stocktake. Now, this is specifically aligned to the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, and this was a landmark agreement because finally there was a breakdown of what would be done to advance towards decarbonization. There were very specific and concrete agreements, one of them, of course, being carbon markets, which is one of the popular ones, but there were many other things around finance, around fossil fuels, of course, and many other things that were agreed on in COP in 2015. And the Paris Agreement then is one of those documents that has remained a compass of sorts for the globe when it comes to decarbonization efforts. And so one of the things that was agreed upon is that the targets that would be achieved by 2030. There was an agreement that after every 5 years, there would be a review, sort of like a stock take to check where exactly have we reached. And this particular stock take that is happening is the first one, because 2015 to 2020 was the first 5 years. And then they take about 2 years to be able to do the stock take. And that's how the system was structured. In this 2 years, then there's been meetings that have been going on, reviews of best practices, who's doing what, who's implementing. And one of the things, again, that was agreed upon was something called NDCs, which is nationally determined contributions, which are agreements by the various countries on what their own contributions towards the global agreement of how we're going to decarbonize as a globe will be. So Kenya has its own NDCs, and so does every single country. And so that's part of the stock take. And over the last 2 years, there's been a review around, okay, what did we do in the last 5 years? How do we need to change? What is working and what is not working? In the finance space, how are countries allocating money towards climate resilience? How are the different countries addressing the issue of adopting renewable energy? How fast are we moving towards that? And many other measures that were agreed upon when it comes to climate change and specifically decarbonization. And so this global stock take is very important because it's a first. And there will be a presentation, a report that says this is how well we're doing or how well we're not doing. And so that's something that anyone who's following the proceedings or following the discourse needs to be aware of. Look out for the report, look out for your own country, for example. We would love to know what Nigeria is doing, what South Africa is doing, what Cambodia is doing, the different countries. What exactly is your country doing towards achieving the global objectives that were set out in the Paris Agreement? The third area that anyone who is following this discourse needs to look out for is the report of how well we are doing vis-a-vis the SDGs. If you remember, in this last couple of months, in September, there was a UN General Assembly meeting that is the halfway mark, review ahead of 2030. It's a halfway mark review to check how well are we doing when it comes to the targets that we set for ourselves in form of SDGs. And so the report wasn't very rosy. It was evident that we're not doing so well in so many areas. Most of them we're just basically not doing well as a globe. But specifically on climate change, it was evident that we're not doing well. And so this COP will also be reviewing the whole concept of climate action and climate change against the concept of sustainable development goals. And that will be a major report again that will be tabled at COP28. One of the things that is required is that countries have been tasked to come with more stringent and more strategic climate strategies for them to be able to move towards the achievement of the objectives that were set out, not just in the Paris Agreement, but also around the SDGs. And this is because the report doesn't look very rosy. Those are some of the things that we could look out for. There are many other areas, for example, reports around education, reports around development, reports around finance, as we mentioned. There are many other areas that will be reviewed when it comes to COP28, but these are the three major global reports that we would be looking out for. One of the things that I'm personally also looking at is one of the Bridgetown Agenda and the progress that has been made so far. As we would all remember, again, one of the landmark outputs of COP27 was the Bridgetown Agenda, which was put forward by Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, and this was accepted as something that should be looked into. And so there was a meeting that was held in June this year in Paris, where there was a conversation around how do we restructure the global finance infrastructure right now to make sure that it's favorable and it addresses the concept of climate resilience. And so that's another area that we look forward to in terms of the progress. There will definitely be a report. Are there proposals? Is there pushback? How soon will it be done? What does this mean for developing countries? There's so many things that we can look forward to, and that's one of my favorites and one of the things that I'm definitely hoping that we would have made progress by the time it's being reported in COP28.